Okay, I believe that amount was already mentioned, but it is approximately 3.8 million. I can find the exact number. I think it was 3,808, 3,808,000 approximately. I'll
Okay,
get the exact
that is
number.
close enough.
Okay, okay.
I'm sorry if I missed the number.
Yeah, I know it was somewhere along the lines. I just cannot remember when. It maybe was in the last report. I'm not sure, but about 3.8 million
Thanks.
health insurance.
And, whoops, Bob, can I just follow up on that?
Kathy?
Okay, so if I'm looking at the line, the quarterly employee benefits for the last quarter, will they run at about, I don't know what they will run at. So if that 5.1, do you expect it to end up with 3.8 or something more? Because I know last year we ended up with a surplus on employee benefit line because of vacancies. So I'm just expecting that in addition to the 3.8 ARPA on the benefit line, right now it's at 5.1. So I know that's going to go down because we don't have fourth quarter benefits yet. So I'm again, Holly, I'm not looking for an exact number, but last year when we closed out the year because of vacancies, we had some excess and we also had some excess on benefits. I mean, excess beyond what we had budgeted. So I don't know whether you have a sense of that right now.
I mean, I don't have an excellent sense of it right now. We are still, I believe yesterday they processed May's health insurance and June's health insurance will be processed in the next week or so. So there are still um another month's health insurance bills that we do need to pay to come out of FY25. It will be, I would say, somewhere between the 3.8 and the 5.1 at this point. I would guess that there would still be, at least likely a couple $100,000 of savings there as well, because there were, again, several vacancies during, a lot of FY25. So there will be some additional funds beyond the 3.8, I would suspect, that will be saved. But I can't commit to a number right now.
No, that's
Like I
okay.
said, we've got one more month of health insurance bills to process in the next week or so, and then I'll have a better handle on that.
And I think it's a safe estimate to put it between the two of them.
Yeah, non-committal at the moment. Give me another week or two.
So I see Mandy's, I have a couple of questions on other lines, but Mandy, you go.
You can go. Mine's moving on to a different line, so you can go.
Okay.
Terry.
So if I go on the revenue lines, or where we're running higher than expected, that I don't think it'll end up being any lower. I'm looking at tax revenues, so the excise taxes and the other ones. So I'm reading those correctly, right? I mean, excise taxes, if anything, will be a little bit higher when we see it end of year. And the same with hotel and meals tax. I'm clearly what I'm trying to do is do rough estimates in my own mind of what this all looks like after you close out the whole year. So I saw that
Yes, there
on
will definitely.
investment income was another one where I understand it won't be like that next year, but right now it's not going to go lower because we have earned that income. Yeah.
That's correct.
So
That is correct.
I will say that the commitment one for motor vehicle got billed around the middle of this quarter, or maybe it was either February or March. So they were just starting those motor vehicle bills. That's the bulk of it. 90% of the bills get billed in that first commitment. And so anything that hasn't come in for the third quarter will likely come in for the fourth quarter, and then everything after that is this sort of this trickle cleanup that the DMV does. So like commitment 1 and 2 have been out. So my assumption is that you'll see that it sort of spikes either in the second or third quarter, depending on when that commitment 1 goes out.
Thank you. Mandy.
Thanks. You mentioned the Public Works Administration, construction and maintenance, and streetlights, traffic lights, equipment maintenance, whatever you're calling it, the DPW sort of lines are high and over budget due to higher utility costs, increased facility and equipment maintenance expenses. And I guess my question on that is they're over budget. Are you still expecting them to end the year over budget? And then I just looked at the budget we passed for those lines, and there's very little increase in those lines in the FY26 budget. So I guess my question is, how much over budget do you think they're going to be this year? Did that near no increase in the FY26 budget happen to cover some of that? The construction and maintenance looks like it's the highway division maybe, and that one actually had a decrease in the FY26 budget due to a frozen position, so I don't know how you calculate that. But how concerning is this over budget given what our FY26 budget is, and are we going to be looking at that department being over budget again in FY26?
I will attempt that one. And the long and short answer of that is yes, I would expect that the DPW lines would be very tight in the coming fiscal years. As was mentioned in the FY26 budget and has been mentioned in many of the budgets, the increase that we had was not even enough to cover salary increases, health insurance increases, our increased costs of pension and those planned increases that we knew we had to account for before anything else. And as mentioned in the budget, we were not able to increase any department's operating budget, really. So over the past several years, we've been relying mostly on vacancies in some of these departments to be able to cover it. So if your operating budget goes over, but you have a vacant position and your salaries are under, we're able to keep within the budget because of that. So what we do is we look at DPW sort of as a whole. People go from one division to another division. They may start working in highway, and then 6 months later they take a job in, the parks department, and they may go from the parks department to the streetlight department. So because of the changes in the shift in people there, and because sometimes some of those expenses may be related to more than one department, we look at it sort of as a whole. As a whole, I do not believe the DPW will be over. You will definitely see some departments over and other departments under. Snow and ice will definitely be over because there is not enough savings in the rest of the DPW to cover that, which is again how we've bailed ourselves out in other years when snow and ice was overspent. We were able to realize a savings maybe in one of the other DPW departments that would bail that snow and ice deficit out. We will have a snow and ice deficit, and the rest of the DPW departments will be very close with a very small surplus is my guess at this point. Again, there are still a few bills that need to be paid for the end of the fiscal year. Today is only the 1st. Everything does not stop on the 30th. There is still a lot of things that need to be processed, numbers that need to be checked, expenses that need to be reviewed and make sure that they're appropriate and things like that. So DPW will be very close. I do not suspect it will be overspent, but I suspect it to be very, very close. Surprisingly, this year, the water and sewer funds worked out better, and the rest of the DPW gave me a little bit more trouble this year, and it's usually the other way around. So I suspect that we will just basically see the snow and ice deficit, and that the rest of DPW will work out very, very close with a minimal surplus or overage, likely a surplus, minimal. So that is something that, again, we had talked about, that we were not able to increase people's operating budgets, and that is going to be a problem in the future. That has been a problem the last couple of years. That is a problem that is going to continue until we have additional funds to be able to, sort of true up those operating budgets to be able to cover everything. So if all of our positions were filled for 365 days of the year, we would not have those vacancies to help us out. That is definitely going to be an issue going forward and something that we need to address.
Mandy, do you have your hand up on a second wish? Because I want to follow up on
No, I will
DPW.
follow up on that one,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yeah, no, I'm going to follow up on you after you follow up. Go ahead.
Which is, I guess it's a twofold follow-up. The budget here, these numbers in the budget on page 6 for the expenses are the total budget, not the personnel lines and the operating lines as we see in the budget book. The budget book has, I guess it's called a personnel services and an operating expenses and then total appropriation, and the quarterly reports come in with a total appropriation. And then the budget book, and you just said sort of, you use that total appropriation as summed together, even though they're split out personnel and operating expenses in a sense. But the budget book has them as personnel services and operating expenses, and it doesn't seem like the actuals in the budget book for FY 22, 23, 24, for example, change the personnel service line and the operating expense line, given what you just said about using personnel service vacancies for operating expenses. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask and find out is, how do we see how much operating expenses are actually being overspent and using those personnel services budget lines to get us a good idea as to essentially how under budget the operating expense line is out of the total appropriation in this quarterly report? Is there a report that can be run to show the operating expense budget versus the personnel services budget and what's been used? Or how do you account for when DPW runs out of operating expense budget in their street and traffic lights, because that's the one I've got up, and they've spent more than $99,650 and are using some of the 29,000 in personnel services for actual operating expenses? How do we see what that fungible money is doing? Where would we see that?
That's a great question. I mean, I suppose we could, this is the quarterly report that's been, used for several years, and I'm just recreating it. I guess we could look to change the way the quarterly report. It's just going to get very long and very messy and a lot more information, but we could change the quarterly report to show the two lines versus the single line. If that's something that the finance committee wants to see, it's just going to take a little more time to put these together, but it can be done. Our Munis reports show that. I could send a Munis report that all this data kind of comes from, that we use to punch into here. There certainly are other reports that can be done or run. It's just a matter of figuring that out.
So
And-
I'm seeing, Mandy, I'm just seeing
Can I-
both. Yeah.
Can I just follow up? So in the budget book, the actuals, do they do that adjustment? Because it seems like they don't. When you look back at a budget from FY 23 to this year's budget book that shows actuals in FY 23, the personnel services numbers tend to stay about the same, and you don't see a lot of that shifting into operating expenses. So do you correct there, or
Yes, absolutely.
or not?
Yep. Those actuals are actual. So they are
For
what
those
was spent
lines.
in that year for salaries and what was spent in that year
Okay.
for operating budgets. So the prior years, the ones that are actuals, absolutely are within the proper categories.
Okay.
Currently right now, the 25 number is still a budget number and the 26 number is still a budget number, but all of those actuals are within the correct categories. Yes.
Okay, so that
Absolutely.
is, if I don't care about the quarterlies, if I care about seeing it sort of as it
At
goes,
the
the
end.
budget
Yep.
book does put that in there that way.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
I see both Melissa and Paul's hands went up on that. So I have a slightly different question again on DPW. So
So I was just going to say, DPW in particular is has a lot of accounts. So if you were to look at an account like for the finance director's office, there's, it's made up of 2 lines in the budget book, but if you were to do, salaries, and, I think the other line in finance director budget is, bereavement leave or something like that. And
Right.
then below that, there's like 2 or 3 lines like office expense, like training or
Training.
conference and travel. Like that's it. That's all there is. It's just 5 lines. DPW, on the other hand, has probably about 50 to 60 lines in each one of their budgets. So the detail, so we know what was overspent in mechanical repairs versus what was overspent in office supplies, because they have a separate category for each one of those things, or maybe those are bad examples, but fuel and mechanical supplies, like how much did we spend on gasoline and how much did we spend on heating the garage and how much did we spend on repairing the vehicles in the garage. Those are all separate lines, broken out in quite detail. But once you get into all that, like it becomes a report that I know you, Mandy, would read it, but it no longer becomes a summary report. It becomes the everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that. It's helpful to know that the budget book does make those corrections. So I just have to pull up various years and compare.
I'm going to wait for Paul before I.
Yes. So just to add to that, I think Mandy already got there. Is like to add that complexity to this report, I think would take a lot of staff time, and just I'm not sure what the benefit would be, as the budget does reveal the information that's at the time you're making decisions. That's all pretty well prepared. I these quarterly reports are a chore to do because we don't have a good system that presents the information in a usable format out of our Munis system. And that's one of the things that we're looking to get to with that new software that we hope to get at some point. So we're trying to sort of manage our staff's time so they do the things that are most essential. So appreciate you recognizing the need for that.
So I was just going to mention, because I did ask Guilford this when we were doing the budget review, some of what we're seeing might be eased up a little bit by what we put in the capital report this year, the capital budget. So the capital budget has a line that's higher for streetlights and has a line that's higher for traffic lights. So the capital side of that, and I asked him whether that helps you on your expense budget. And he said, absolutely. So it's, it may not adjust for all of what we're seeing as overage, but some of it is the actual purchase of, I'm going to wing it, light bulbs and, the poles that go up that get knocked down regularly. So some of that moved into lines that are either higher or didn't exist at all before. Some combination of the two.
Okay, Andy?
I just wanted to share the observation that the largest expense frequently that comes up that has to be covered during a year is the overtime in departments, because as we heard during the budget hearing process, if the police department is understaffed, that they have to find ways to bring people in extra hours to cover that. And that's all within the personnel line, really. It's just a different way of, ideally we'd want to be a fully staffed department and not have to ask our employees to work additional hours, which has financial consequences beyond. So we just need to recognize that the biggest expense is probably still covered within personnel.
I had a question about the education expense line, the elementary school. First of all, it's only at 67%, whereas I'd expect it to be a little bit higher. And I mean, it's not off. I mean, basically, I assume their expenses in the July and August are much lower than they are in September through June, but it does seem a little bit low. And then I don't know, understand what the 896,000 of encumbrances are in the elementary school budget. Can you please explain that?
Okay, well, I'm going to take a little stab at it, but the elementary school budget is really up to the elementary school on how that gets broken out. So at the time, there were $896,000 worth of expenditures, worth of purchase orders outstanding. The elementary school does purchase orders for almost every expenditure. So those expenditures, or I'm sorry, those encumbrances of 896,000 are more than likely things that have been ordered, purchased, done in, February, March, but they just hadn't been paid for yet.
Okay.
And then the other thing I can guess, again, I don't manage the elementary school budget on a day-to-day basis. But the other thing that I can guess with the elementary school budget, and the reason why that percentage might be slightly lower, is because with the elementary school, with teachers in general, schools in general, there's different ways that they get paid. And so what happens is some of the teachers get the, 26 biweekly payroll for 12 months out of the year. Other folks choose to get it for 10 months out of the year. So there is usually in June a very large payroll expense, which covers the they call it the balloon payroll, and it's like the remainder of the payment that they would have received over the summer. So that last payroll of the fiscal year is always much higher because of the way that the teachers get paid. So they're always going to be showing a little bit behind because of the way their payroll systems work out. But really getting into the details of why they're only at, those are just things that I can guesstimate is because of the balloon payroll and because there were so many outstanding purchase orders on March 31st. But if you really wanted to dig into that line, it would be questions for the school
No, I
department.
understand that. I understand that.
That hopefully, that's my best guess.
No, it makes sense. Any other questions?
Didn't you have another one, Bob? I'm sorry. I think I only addressed one. Didn't you have a second question?
Well, well, it was basically you answered both of them. I was wondering
Okay, the encumbrance and the 67%.
and then the facts that they're only at 67%, which again, I would expect them to be about 70% based on the school year. So, assuming their expenses are much lower in July and August. So anyway, it's not far off. Any other questions? Okay. I think
I do want to thank you for getting us the third quarter
Really?
report very much. And I realize it came in the first week of May or thereabouts, and that was very much appreciated, although some of us failed to see that it was there. But it was great. It was great to get it.
Yeah, it's very helpful to see these reports. So I guess we can let me see if there's any other people in the audience. Okay, there's one other person. So maybe we can move on to the next discussion of, so what are we going to do with the surplus that we have, the free cash that we have? Is that what you wanted to talk about, Kathy?
Yeah, so Kathy put this, what does that mean, capital on it? And so I had two things that I thought would be worth discussing without truly discussing. One was Melissa had mentioned to me the potential or to think about. We have a capital reserve and we've got a DPW building that we're hoping that we would move toward building it, not just talking about it. And would we want to grab the capital reserve money for DPW as a building? And I thought that was a really good idea for a whole host of reasons. One, we're carrying a lot of reserves and people are paying attention to it. And we keep saying we're saving it for the buildings. So all, it does depend on, we don't have a committee yet, and then the speed at which we would start to be able to draw down. But I thought it clearly won't pay for all of the DPW building, but it would mean that what we budgeted in the 5-year capital plan would be less because some of it would be paid from the capital reserve. And since the fire department now is out in some future land, I thought starting to talk about, so that was one item that I thought, is it worth discussing now or can we just wait? The second is at the request of the finance committee, the joint capital planning committee started a discussion without reaching conclusions on if there is surplus capital, what might we think were areas to spend it on? So that when we see the closeout, Holly, at the end of the year and it's certified, that we've already had some discussion. And during the JCPC discussion, it was roads, potentially thinking about the middle school roof and vehicles, where those were the three, not necessarily in whatever order. And on middle school roof, the discussion was the accelerated repair part of the roof was for the classroom side of the building, but the rest of the roof that covers the pool, the rec department, the auditorium wasn't part of it. So that, and those are the heavily used town side. So, but that's as far as we got with having that discussion. So I thought those two items we could start a discussion on the finance committee, and I'm not sure which order, on where we might. And then the only other one was, and this one can be out in the future, the the FY27 capital budget right now with everything listed underneath it is in a pretty severe deficit. And at some point, do we want to say which of the items on that are not urgent? So one of the things I was doing, DPW's capital debt service starts to come on if we start to build the building. So those are really the two things I had in mind as an initial discussion to get the committee's thoughts without trying to reach a conclusion. And that was the entire line called capital. And why did I put it on?
Andy?
Yeah, Kathy, thank you for starting the conversation. And I'm glad that you mentioned roads, because I think that one thing that we do know from the information that we received through Jason Skeel's report earlier this year to TSO is how far behind we are on roads and what it's going to take to even begin to get us back, and the realization that as you repair roads, other roads are continuing to deteriorate because we live in New England. So that's one topic. The other topic that it came up in today's Gazette, for those of us who read the Gazette, was something that you're familiar with, Kathy, which is what's happening with the elementary school building, and are we going to get the reimbursements we were expecting to get from the Inflation Reduction Act for some of the energy features, and if those are going to not come through, as was discussed in this morning's newspaper, then we need to understand what the consequences and options are.
So just one word on that, because I read the Gazette as all of you did. And since am I getting the Times earlier or before you? Anyway, when I'm reading now, the last thing I saw on the Senate side was they would be expiring in 2027. If they don't go out till 2027, we might be in good shape. So that's all. The might is in quotes around that, because as Paul is quoted as saying, we can't bill for it until we've spent it, and the spending it is the school is operational, and we're expecting that end of June or the beginning of July. So we would be in time if it's still on the books for submitting it then, Andy. So it's clearly at risk. And to the extent we were going to bill in a second year for the solar side of it, because we were going to split the two for a variety of reasons, the geothermal and the solar might be too late, but the big one was the geothermal. And that was what, Paul, you were quoted on as our geothermal number. Yeah. So he can talk on that more. Yeah.
Yeah. If, is it okay to jump? Yeah. So I think that that's accurate. We looked at the New York Times article as well today, and the 27 is an important year for us. It matters to us. Whether it's actually just solar or geothermal or not is another question. It's unclear what the House is going to do. So this is all really speculative. These are funds that we haven't budgeted. It's funds that we ostensibly would replenish our reserves because we appropriate the $5 million additionally with the hope that this would come back to us. So, until there's so many unknowns at this, so I don't think it's not something we can plan on. It's going to be we hope we get it and lobby to make sure we get it type thing.
Councilor Haneke?
Yeah, I appreciate the lobbying, the tracking of that. What it seems like it would affect is not property tax bills, but it would affect essentially how quickly or how much is available for capital spending in the future because of what we did a couple of years ago with our capital reserve account. So obviously it's important, but it's and hopefully we don't lose out. But I'm not sure right now is a time that we need to be discussing what to do if it happens, because it's not, we know there's enough money to complete, given the borrowing authorization, as long as things come in on budget, that it's not going to affect that. To answer or to discuss some of the other questions about upcoming, where certified free cash might be and what we might, advise our manager on what financial orders to bring back in November when free cash is certified. I think my priorities still stay with make sure free cash is at 5%, the stabilization at, those sort of the stabilization at 10, and then the reparations. I think there's the lawsuit settlement fund. I forget for what drug, that money that needs to come out because of legal requirements and all. And then I think we need to discuss, Kathy, your idea about DPW is interesting. Would we funnel most of it into the sort of capital stabilization fund for that at that time, or roads? And I think at this point, given everything I've heard, and I know I've been one of the counselors for the last 7 years that has not been a push road money. I will say that right now. I've been one of the ones that says they're not horrible, but I cannot deny the reports coming out about how much we must spend just to keep even with the current state of them. That number has given me a lot of pause. And so I think it would be good to discuss and get some information about how much, I know I can look it up and do it now, but how much in roads we've devoted to roads for FY26 already, given Chapter 90, the supplemental bill and all of that, get that number so that we're more informed, and then say how much should we be devoting in order to maintain, if not go up. It didn't look like there was a maintain number in the report. There was the
Yes.
5 million that would what I found was interesting was increase us to 70 and then sort of maintain at 70, sort of once inflation and cost caught up. But there wasn't really one that would maintain at 62. And I'm not sure we want to maintain at 62, but if we can get that number, then maybe we can talk about how much we would need to sort of advise Paul on for if there's money in certified free cash after those other priorities to initially put to roads to aim for. Are we going to aim for getting up to 70? Are we going to aim for getting up to 65? Something like that, and what those numbers are, to talk about those numbers, because I think that is an important thing. We are hearing more and more from more and more constituents. I know for a while the district councilors heard a lot, but at-large councilors didn't hear as much about roads, and now at-large councilors, I've seen myself get a lot more comments than I did in the last 6 years regarding roads. The middle school roof, I'm not ready at this point to allocate more money to that. I would need a lot more information about plans for the middle school, plans for ownership, plans for use, plans for all sorts of things. What the school plan is with that half, I find it strange that the current grant would only repair part of the roof. I haven't been following their system, but I think I'd need more information before I'd be willing to and ready to advise the manager to put town money into a non-town building, given the state of our other needs and capital needs at this point. Unless there is corresponding money coming from the other 3 towns that are part of the region, then it's a different conversation. But yeah, that's sort of where I am right now.
Yeah. So Mandy, I believe in Jason's presentation, the words he mentioned 3 million to kind of maintain what we have. I don't know that there wasn't a line in the graph for that, but he did. I remember reading 3 million was the amount we needed to put in above Chapter 90 in order to maintain what we've got in the bad conditions that we have. But
So when they say above Chapter 90, is that just the annual Chapter 90, or is that the Chapter 90 plus the supplemental fair share money that's been coming through both annually and in the most recent supplemental bill? Because I had thought, I mean, it would be cleaner if those numbers are all road money, not road money excluding Chapter 90. So I think we need clarification there.
Well, I read, yeah, I agree, but I think he was talking about town money in above and beyond Chapter 90, but I don't know if it was included as supplemental or not. I don't know what detail he
Well,
might.
and that's been, I think, one of the issues, Paul. I keep raising this, that it would be nice to get a fix on how much Chapter 90 plus the additional. So it ran $1 million in 2025. It was over $1 million, the two combined. And 2026, the number is not. We haven't seen it yet. So it's kind of like it would be nice to put. We're up to 750 cash side for FY26, and just to get near enough to know we know what that is. And then is 3 million the target, or is it 3 million above all of that would be something I would want to know. Yeah. I see Bernie's hand is up too.
Bernie?
Yeah, I'm sitting here chuckling because I heard an interview with Bernie Sanders a couple of days ago where he pointed out that as a Democratic Socialist mayor of Burlington, he still managed to fill the potholes, and he thinks that those are important. So that's that goes beyond David Plouffe's mandate that you can be as visionary as you want, but you have to pick up the trash and fill the potholes. I would like to have, I think it would be helpful to have a better understanding of what Chapter 90 money can go for, because there are strings attached. And we shouldn't go forward with the assumption that we can use Chapter 90 money to fill potholes and pave this and pave that. It would be helpful to know where those limits are and what the regional DPW will approve when you put in a request to spend the Chapter 90 money. So that you have a better idea of how much funds, local funds, town funds, have to be raised for what. We also need to keep in mind that there are certain macro impacts that we don't control that will affect how much we can do with the roads, and that is the price of hydrocarbons, which appears to be coming down. That's good news. The other news that's out there is that the number of firms that can, that are capable of doing this work because we don't have a town crew large enough to do these larger paving jobs. We have to hire them out. It might be helpful, and I know we've talked about this, to have a chunk of change and a certain amount of money, and then write contracts against that extend out over several years, so that we have the resources tied up, and we know that we've got organizations that can do the work on the streets. I would also just keep in mind that we can create as many stabilization funds as we care to. At least DOR seems to think that. So it would probably be helpful to have a stabilization fund that was targeting the highway garage, and a stabilization fund that was targeting the new fire station, and make regular appropriations into those funds, rather than having a large lump of money, undesignated money, just sitting there, which invites people to speculate on how else you can spend it. So I always find the debate about roads interesting, because every town I've lived in, the roads were terrible. And sometimes were worse than others, but we do have to maintain. That's an asset, and we do have to maintain it, and it's a bit more difficult, I think, than what the average citizen might think goes into it. So those are my observations.
Thank you. Paul, did you want to?
Yeah, so I think the important piece here is that the council is saying we have our standard sort of allocation of free cash when it comes to you in November, whenever it is. But also what I'm hearing today is that yes, roads is a high priority, and so we really want to come to us with a plan for addressing roads with not only in the capital but also with the free cash that we have available at the end of this calendar or fiscal year. So if I'm hearing you correctly, I think that that's a challenge and a plan that we would bring to you, and sort of show it where the money would come from, what it could be used for, those types of things that you've been asking for.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. It's clearly weighing on the citizens' minds,
Yep.
and I think if we had a plan that we could all agree to, I think that would go a long way towards. Right now people just see the roads and nobody's dealing with them, and they get worse and worse, and then they get angrier and angrier.
Yeah, just to be, we do have a contract about to be, I'm not sure if it's been awarded or not yet, but for about $3 million worth of work this summer.
Right. No, yeah, I know. It's, that helps, but we have a $40 million plus liability. So it's not going to fix all the roads all the time.
Right.
So Kathy, did you want?
I agree with that summary. And my other one I raised, and Bernie's kind of started to step back into that, is if we look at, I think the stabilization fund for capital was over $11 million or whatever the number is that I saw in the budget book. People keep looking at that for operating funds, and so yes, 5%, and yes, 10%. That, but then in addition, we've got Y%, and it's a big number. So that was why I thought to start to say, a large chunk of that is going to be dedicated to DPW, if that's the right thing to say. So I thought that was a good, and Bernie was saying, well, maybe a large chunk is DPW, a large chunk is fire, but rather than, it's just called capital now. So you could think of, we could take a little bit out of that. No one's going to suffer, because right now it's not toward a purpose. It's not as designated. So I wasn't, and that's why if we're moving more quickly toward DPW, we heard we need an OPM, we need to design, we need a bunch of things. So it would pay for a chunk of that without incurring debt, if that makes sense. So that's a bunch of ifs, but to start using it rather than keep using it as a big rainy day fund when it's pouring in other places. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, it says capital stabilization fund. When we talked about it, we did say we're saving up for a fire station. That's what we did a year ago or 2 years ago, whenever it was. We were really explicit about that's what that account is for, saving up to pay cash for a fire station, because that's how we had done our projections. I think I mean, we can do I think we have to be alert to what interest rates are going to be doing when it comes time. It might be better for us to pay our capital up front or unless interest rates are really low. So I think that we just have to look at what we need for money at the time. We just have to be flexible and look at the economic situation at the moment.
And that's why I said I wasn't pushing for it, but I'm just, it doesn't pay for a whole building anyway. So all it's paying for is a big chunk of it. And trying to, I guess, more quickly spend it if we finally have a building to spend it on,
Mm.
rather than waiting for the building that still doesn't have a piece of land to build on.
That-
And Sean had just suggested fire station because it was the second one, and then it would keep accumulating it. So it wasn't, again, I put it on the list just to be thinking about it rather than making decisions about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the bigger challenge this year is going to be the ARPA money that's going to wind up in free cash, and it's going to be a big number, and people are going to see it, and legitimately so. And so we've been really transparent about how we've addressed that, and how the council decides to appropriate those funds.
Yeah. And we need at least 5% because we spent down on it for banks, but it looks like there's still more money. Yeah.
Councillor Haneke?
Thank you. In some sense, I like Bernie's idea of renaming the capital stabilization fund more towards DPW and fire station stabilization fund. I'd put them both in there. Just to be a little more explicit that this isn't really roads and sidewalks either. This is building and two specific buildings. I don't object right now to Kathy's idea of potentially spending it down quickly and then maybe working on regenerating. I think I'd want to see the projections though, as we get closer to spending money, just like we've had in the past. Here's a couple of options. I think I'd want to see some projections on. I know the last set we had sort of had us using some of that to top up annual capital spending so that we could keep up with the annual capital needs too, as inflation goes higher and things go there, due to all of the debt service on DPW and that. So I think I just want, maybe it's a different set of projections when we get there, if we're thinking spend that down now and not use it as a top up. But I think Kathy's suggestion is worth considering, depending on where interest rates go, right? And inflation goes and all, it might be the best option. So I'm not objecting to it. I'd like to consider it.
Yeah, I think Paul's comment on basically seeing what the situation is when we actually need to spend the money is the correct way to go. And then we'll make a decision at that point, what makes the most sense. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to reopen public comment. If anyone in the attendees wants to make a public comment, I'm going to reopen it. I see there's one person there. If you wish to make a comment, please raise your hand. Okay, I don't see it. So okay, so I'm going to close public comment period since there were no public comments. The next thing on the agenda is our next meeting, which was tentatively scheduled for July 15th. Lynn has, Andy, did you have a comment?
You're muted.
You're muted.
I just wanted to ask one question. before we get out as we do the scheduling, not separate. And that is, did we ever do the audit for this year? I mean, the audit is getting old because it was 24.
Yeah, we're not ready for that yet, but or Holly can address it. So when it's completed, I think we'll be bringing it to you and scheduling it.
The audit has been delayed this year. It is not complete. I expect it to be done basically any day now. They are waiting for one additional piece of information from me, which unfortunately I have not had time to get to, and that is going to be first on my list as soon as this end of the year stuff is
Okay,
buttoned up a bit.
I was asking because we usually do it much earlier in the year, and
Right.
just dawned on me as we were going through. The other thing that might be helpful now that we have a completed budget from the House and Senate, we're just waiting to see what the governor does and if there are overrides necessary. But these are the cherry sheets. We're getting to the point where they're the cherry sheets that are really count, and it might be time for us to just get that cherry sheet information and current projections for other revenue and make sure where we are for our FY26 projected revenue with where we expect it to be when we adopted the budget. So those were the two things that I wanted to raise as we were thinking about scheduling meetings. So I'll drop it at that.
Okay, Bernie?
Yeah, it is the end of the year, and what comes to mind is the end of the year letter that the Department of Revenue sends around. So I think Holly is going to be, and her and other staff are going to be very busy. This is not going to be a laid back, easygoing summer. It's not over. And I think if the end of the year letter got shared with the members of the Finance Committee and the members of the Council, it would be helpful because it gives you some small notion of the amount of work that goes into wrapping up the budget. You know, you just can't click the little X up in the corner and have the spreadsheet go away.
Kathy?
And I do want to mention, a lot of our staff are taking some well-earned time off, especially during July and August. So we're encouraging them to do that. So, in terms of, there's a lot on the, especially finance, but during the summer, we do recognize the employees have earned their time and we try to encourage them to use it.
So I had originally put July 15th with a question mark, and that was way back in the middle of June, which is not that long ago. And one reason was because I'm on an airplane on July 15th, returning back to Amherst. So it was clear to me that date didn't work. So Lynn sent a note that with this work we're doing with the other three towns, starting as early as possible to talk about revenue projections, where we think we're going to be and key areas we're spending on. So I guess the question is, if it's not July 15th, are we going to try to meet again in July? And so what I've heard is there might be an audit report. If it's not in July, is it early in August? Because there are two as needed dates we put on our calendar, July 15th and August 19th. And I'm not asking for a date right now, other than I don't think July 15th works. And so hearing back, Paul, on depending on what we're talking about, what dates could work for staff, that staff aren't on vacation. And then Lynn's request that we start talking earlier about revenue projections. I'm back for the whole summer once I get back. So I'm indifferent to any Tuesday. And I wasn't asking for a decision today, but as much to raise that the 15th didn't really seem needed when I first talked about it with Bob. And now it feels like we might need it for a variety of reasons. So I'm lowering my hand just to leave the question of when we might want to meet, because it looks like we should meet. And Bernie said there's a letter we could be reviewing. There's a variety of pieces. So
Yeah, I agree. We probably should meet again. And the 22nd is fine for me. So if it's, I don't know about staff, Paul. I don't know if you can answer that now, but I think if we can get the best time for the staff, within the next couple of days, that would be helpful.
So I guess the question, there's two things. One is the letter Bernie referenced, Kathy, is just to give a scale of the requests that are given to the
Okay.
finance department. It's just to let you know, it's a lot of work that gets done
It's a
in the
lot of,
finance
okay.
department. Yeah, I think that it wasn't like the finance committee had to review it or necessarily. It's just
Right.
more important, instructive, I think. I guess the question would be is, we're not going to have staff capacity to do much. If you're asking for us to do something between now and the 22nd, that's that's going to be a very big challenge. So if you're just going to meet and talk amongst yourselves, that's fine too.
So Paul, if we get off this and you say, what about the 29th? I'm just doing Tuesdays, and you look forward and you don't commit right now. If you could give us back a date, that might work, because the next time we have is August 19th, and that seems late for addressing. And I see Mandy's hand is up about, this 4 towns trying to get together with the schools. And I think that meeting is scheduled for the 11th of August. So trying to do something earlier. But in any case, I'll stop talking.
Andy?
Yeah, no, I was just going to suggest that what we've done it very effectively, and I think in a productive way, is to identify what the committee needs to do for its own work plan going forward. But at some point, we can't do it without staff support and staff preparing us for these topics. And it's getting to a point now where I think the chair and the vice chair should meet with the town manager, the finance staff, and come up with a proposal. I don't think that it's something we can do today.
Okay. Councilor Henneke?
I mean, I was gonna say, I think it sounds to me as if early August or late July is better than early mid-July. Even the 29th might be too early, given some of the stuff I'm hearing about staff commitments and all. I will say on the 29th, I have a policy committee meeting in Boston, so it would be very hard for me to attend the finance committee too. Because it's not supposed to be a finance committee day. I was hoping to make the trek into Boston for the 11 a.m. policy committee meeting, but that makes it hard to get back in time. But I wonder if August 5th, which is also slated before that August 11th date, might be a good time. It would normally be, I think, one of our meeting days because we normally do 1 and 3.
Yeah.
I do think it might be important for finance committee to meet before August 11th if that meeting goes forward. Once we have an agenda for that meeting and maybe more information. So I think closer to that meeting date is also better because we might have more information from other elected bodies about what the agenda is or what they want to talk about, or letters from them and things to actually discuss. So I would argue at this point for August 5th seems to me the better day of everyone we've talked about. But yeah, we can leave it up to Kathy and Bob to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think August 5th is a good date to shoot for.
Okay.
My muted comment was that was efficient.
All right. So any topics not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance of the meeting? I think that's it then. I think we can then, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'm an aye. Councilor Hanneke?
Aye.
Kathy?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Alicia,
Yes.
Tom,
I concur.
Bernie.
Concur.
All right, we're adjourned at 3:10 p.m. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.